Thank you to everyone for attending another MassMEDIC Women in MedTech. We are incredibly excited to have you here and really just appreciate all of the support on this. We have an outstanding program, so I won't delay too long before jumping into it, but just a few housekeeping things. Remember to keep yourself on mute. We do absolutely welcome questions, and the easiest way to do that is to enter them into the chat option. So please feel free, as our speakers are going through their presentations, to type in questions, and we'll get to them at the end during a Q&A session. So absolutely encourage that. Just a few things. MassMEDIC has a number of events coming up in September and October. We just next week are doing a design workshop on how might we, and virtual trivia and networking in 2 weeks, and a lot more happening in October. So if you'd like to be a part of any of those events, please visit massmedic.com. We have them all there, and we'd absolutely love to have you. We try to keep our events really fun and interactive, so I really hope that you can come and we'll get to know you all a little bit more. So I hope you don't mind me sharing a little bit of a personal note. I think I try not to get too mushy with most people, and I know so many of you, but I have been so honored to meet even more of you during the COVID-19 crisis. I think we can all say 2020 has been a bit of a trying year, and this brought me around to one of the reasons we have these Women in MedTech programs. You know, when we last met for the virtual event, I think in May, we talked about finding your tribe, mental health, and inspiration. I'm not sure about the rest of you, but I know I've gone through waves of battling with finding all of those things. So I just wanted to take a minute to encourage you that if you're feeling a lack of motivation, or like me, struggling to stay out of the kitchen a little bit, stressed with kids being back in school, you're not alone. You know, we are a community for you. And the three things that get me through on a daily basis is prayer, family, even though they're all remote, and this community. So I encourage you that if you start to feel overwhelmed, please reach out to us. We are all of your community. And like I said, I see so many people that I know on this call, and even more that I would like to get to know. So just if you're going through anything, or if you're looking for your tribe, we're here for you. My email is rachel@massmedic.com. I would love to get to know all of you more. So with that, I'd like to thank our sponsors who make these events possible. We could not do this without Sunrise Labs, Mullings Group, Zymedica, and the National Society of Black Engineers. Our sponsors are not just our members, they are our partners, and they're our friends. We appreciate all that they do in making these events possible. So please join me in giving them a virtual round of applause, because they are a lifeline for us. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Tanika Jones from the National Society of Black Engineers to share with us a little bit about what the organization is doing.
Great, thank you so much, Rachel, for that. So again, we are NSBE HiSig is very excited to be here and be a part of this forum today. We're very excited to network with the partners, and would just like to just introduce what NSBE HiSig represents a bit more. So I'm going to share a screen. Okay, is everyone able to see the screen? I know we have many people on the call. Can you see it? Great. All right. So just a little bit about what NSBE HiSig represents and who we are. So HiSig is actually a subset of NSBE overall, and we represent a special interest group, that specifically being healthcare innovation and special interest group. That's us. So how do we do that? So really, we utilize a strategy called CARE. And if we look at the graphic in the center, you'll note in blue that we like to connect, and let's just use the rest of the acronym ARE for who we are. One, we advance. How do we do that? We advance innovation through three sectors: research, development, and commercialization. One of our second aims is we love to recruit and retain members. And so anyone interested in healthcare innovation, we absolutely would like to connect with you. And then E is a big strategy for us. We educate and expose both NSBE members and the Black community at large to really address gaps in healthcare disparities through innovation and also career pathways. We don't do this work in isolation, so we have a board that represents a plethora of experiences and diverse backgrounds. And so you can see in the upper left, Author Edge, the third is our director. He's actually on this call today and is very supportive of this event. Our deputy director is Dr. Ursula Sims. I am the programs chair on the board. We have a director emeritus, John Thomas, there in the center at the top. Our treasurer is Dr. Theo Nicholson. Communications Secretary, Tony Black. We have Tia Riggins, who is awesome woman who is working on her PhD. She's a candidate now. Sandra Jones is actually an entrepreneur who's our membership chair. And our new partnership lead there is listed, and his name is Ron. So how can we, moving forward, also connect with you? So we'd like you to connect with us, and we want to connect with you. So there are a couple things you can do interactively on the screen now. There will be soon popping up a link in the chat. We'd like to collect some information from people who are on the webinar today. But you can also, if you have a camera phone, just go ahead and scan the QR code, and it will take you directly to the form so that we can extract information and keep in contact with you. There are 4 ways on social media you can connect with us. We have our LinkedIn handle on the left. You can connect via Facebook, Instagram, or tweet. And then also we have an upcoming event ourselves. So we'd also like to plug our MIT Hacking Racism event that we have upcoming. We've partnered with them for some great conversations moving forth. And so with that, we do thank you so much again, Rachel and Sunrise, and also MassMEDIC overall for this opportunity. And I'll pass it back to you now.
That's fantastic. That sounds like an excellent event. We'll make sure we get all that information up on our website as well. So if you didn't get a chance to copy the information, or if you have more questions, please check it out at massmedic.com. We want to make sure that we are partnering with you all as much as possible. So thank you so much, Dr. Jones. We really do appreciate all the support for this event.
Thank you. We're happy to be here.
So this seems like a great time to kick into programming. I would like to ask our sponsor, Lauren from Sunrise Labs, to go ahead and introduce our speaker. Sunrise Labs, big shout out on this event. They have been instrumental in helping us pull this one together. And like I said, our sponsors are not just sponsors, they are our partners and friends. So we could not do it without them. Lauren, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. We're really just delighted to be part of this today. Special shout out also to Dee Cleary on my team, who really helped a lot on behind the scenes pulling this together. And for those of you that don't know Sunrise, we've been focused in product development of medical devices for over 28 years now. More than 20 years, as I like to tell people, just don't go beyond, say 20 plus years, that's what we've got to say. But really doing complete product development from early stage concept, bringing full capabilities to bear on innovative concepts, focused on products that improve patients' lives. And I'm really delighted today to be able to introduce a prior client, Nancy Confrey, one of our keynote speakers here today. Nancy is an amazing individual who has led, had leadership roles in both startup and large corporate entities. She started in a technical role in software, literally has written books on the subject, which I'm familiar with, but can't say that I've read. And most recently was startup of a company called Health Beacons, which I think is very appropriate also for the topic at hand today. Health Beacons localizer product really is poised to become the gold standard for identifying non-palpable breast lesions. And I think Nancy's journey from, through her career, as well as specific to the entrepreneurship in her successful work with Health Beacons, is a really amazing story. So Nancy, I'd love to have you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you've done through the years here.
Thanks, Lauren, and thank you to everyone for being here, and thank you to Sunrise Labs, and I will come back to that as part of my story because it is actually part of the story. Here I'm going to share my screen. I have some sort of silly-ish slides, if I can find them. Hopefully those are up. So what I thought I would do, we just have a few minutes, and I was going to quickly tell the story from beginning to end of Health Beacons in a record amount of time. And even though I could probably fill a weekend of discussion on this, and then just focus on one thing that I think is sort of interesting and unusual about the company. And then you guys can later ask any questions you want about it. But so my journey with Health Beacons starts with a procedure that I was undergoing for preceding a lumpectomy. And I'm trying to figure out how I change my, how do I change? Oh, sorry, there. I was going through a procedure that a radiologist was leaning over me, and she was a woman about my age, mature doctor. And this is not what she looked like, but this is how it felt that someone was looking at me so closely. And under her breath, she muttered, "If I get this wrong, I'm going to kill myself," which as a patient, that was a little alarming to hear, and perhaps that wasn't the best bedside chat to hear. But she was actually right in that if she made a mistake in this procedure, that could severely affect the surgery that I was about to undergo and the ability to remove the cancer. And so I thought to myself, that probably needs changing. So meanwhile, though, I was a management consultant. I worked with senior teams doing strategy and with healthcare companies, medical device. And in particular, we were looking for strategies that introduced technical innovation. And so I had so much experience with, telling people what to do and how to do it. And so I said to myself, how hard could it be for me to actually change this procedure? So I sort of filed it in the back of my head. And serendipitously, a friend was golfing with a guy who said that he had this device that had to do with better location during lumpectomy procedures. And my friend remembered that I had gone through it and asked me if I wanted to talk to him. And it turned out that these guys, a radiologist who understood how bad the procedure was and a scientist who he partnered with, and they used an Australian professor to come up with, who used this to find fish in Australia, and it came up with a prototype that they thought would work, but it had been sitting in the closet for several years for a much longer reason than I have time to share here. But it was basically no one was doing anything with it. So I did due diligence in talking to doctors to really determine that there was a huge crying need for that procedure to be changed. It wasn't just patients who hated it, and wasn't just radiologists. Surgeons hated it too. And so that began the journey of Health Beacons. And to just quickly come to the end of the story, and that was probably 2014 or 2015. In April of 2017, we got our first FDA clearance. In October of that same year, we got our ISO 13485 and our CE mark. I had a worldwide distributor, Faxitron, who then got bought by Hologic, and we closed the sale to Hologic. And we were doing probably 1,000 procedures a month, making about $1 million a month, and closed the sale to Hologic in January 31st of this year. So that's sort of the nutshell story from beginning to end. And I guess that shows you that this was a very specific kind of enterprise, right? I was not setting out to make a big company and see how far I could grow it. I really wanted to just prove the value, show other people that there was value here and that it was a viable market, and then give it into the hands of an organization that had the breadth and the expertise, and frankly also matched my model of who I wanted it to go to because it was my baby, and then for me to step back. So that's what I did. And I think the one thing that I would say that was interesting about the company, and the huge number of stories I could tell about what I went through to get there, but really, it was a virtual company, which means that up until about 6 months before I sold it, I was the only employee. So every single thing I did was with contractors. And if I were to say what 3 things that I think were most important about being a virtual company, I would say the first was quality, that notified bodies and the FDA look at you askance when they're sitting in your bedroom and asking you about your contract manufacturers and all your manufacturing practices and your sterilization practices. And so you have to have a squeaky clean QMS with very, very diligent management of it. And the second is the importance of really, really strong partnerships that are with like-minded people and really willing to work with you as a team. And Sunrise Labs really exemplified this, I have to say. And that is because you don't have any control over how engaged they are or in what way they're engaged. And so you really have to find those best partners, and then they're taking a risk with you is the issue with being small and virtual. They don't know if you're going to have money to end it. They don't know if you're going to crash and burn and put their business at risk. So recognizing always that your partners are going above and beyond for you because you're such a small company was, I thought, critical to making it a successful partnership. And then finally, you have no way, with no employees, there's no way to control anyone except to infuse them with your own passion and your own urgency. And so that was sort of the really critical piece, I thought, to making it a virtual company or being a successful virtual company. So I think that's all I have time for, but happy to answer any questions later, and certainly happy to answer questions that people have outside of this forum also.
Thank you, Nancy. That, again, I've heard your story. I'm so pleased that you could take the time to share it with those of us on the event today. I think just how that started with a personal experience that you really drove into a product that is now being sold and helping improve outcomes, I think is really just amazing. So thank you for sharing that. Really switching now over to our second speaker in this keynote series is Dr. Angelique Johnson. I've had the pleasure of getting to know a little bit about Dr. Johnson through this process. And I do hope that you're all taking the time to read the backgrounds provided on both Nancy Confrey and Dr. Angelique Johnson. Just amazing the number of roles and accomplishments they both had through the years. I actually would like to share something, and I hope this is okay, Dr. Johnson, because I didn't ask your permission ahead of time, but really trying to research a little bit about Dr. Johnson coming into this in the introduction. I was really interested to see, and again, this is something very relevant to the times, that assuming the internet is correct, you're one of 10 siblings who were homeschooled. And again, for those of us that are dealing with the chaos that is trying to, juggle work and school, I just thought, oh my goodness, that's an amazing statistic. But she really, in some of what I was able to read, really understood from a pretty early age what her path was going to be, and combining really this passion she has for math and science and improving outcomes in people's lives. So she's going to be speaking to us today in her current role as founder and CEO of MEMStim. So with that, Dr. Johnson, I'll turn it over to you and really look forward to hearing more about your story.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much for having me. I am going to go off some slides, and so let's try to do this. I'm working with Google Meet so much, switching back to Zoom. So as stated, I'm Dr. Angelique Johnson. I am CEO and founder of a company called MEMStim. And at MEMStim, we're really creating implantable stimulators for treating different conditions within the body. So for example, some of the devices that we work with treat hearing loss. Some are treating chronic pain in the form of being spinal cord stimulators. Some are being implanted in the neck and treating epileptic seizures, and then deep brain stimulators for Parkinson's tremors. We, rather than making the complete device, we actually make a critical component of those devices, the electrode lead. So that's the bundle of wires that's stimulating nerves and neurons for treatment. Here's an example of a cochlear implant. And for those that are hearing impaired, and really is for individuals that no matter how much you amplify the sound externally using an external hearing implant or hearing aid, you cannot get the cells to respond because they are in fact damaged or dead or very significantly weakened. And so you replace what used to be biologically created electrical information with artificially created electrical information. The short of it is these leads coming through the cochlea are the actual device that we produce. And in layman's terms, I like to say that we make pacemaker-like devices, but for different parts of the bodies, for treating blindness, hearing loss, and chronic pain. What we really do in terms of our value proposition is we eliminate hand assembly in the process. Right here is a picture that you guys can see of an actual technician hand assembling a cochlear implant. They're looking under a microscope. You don't see that part of it, but as you can see, it's very fine wires and very tedious. You have to be very delicate with it. And it just gets very challenging to innovate. So what MEMStim does is we use 3D printing and microfabrication to fully automate this process. We have some really great innovations that we develop, and the 3 target areas that we're really focusing on is reducing labor, accelerating throughput, and enabling innovation. Our bottom line solutions are following the way of just being future proof. A lot of times people are getting medical implants and we don't maybe think about that as a medical implant developer or maybe as an insurance provider, but patients are always wondering, if I'm gonna put something in my body that's gonna be semi-permanent, I want to know, is something better going to come in 20 years? I mean, imagine if we were all still using the phones from 20 years ago, right? So as patients are aging, they want to know, am I going to have the best technology? And what we do at MEMStim really is a lot of future-proofing implants by creating innovative technologies that can adapt as the patient themselves grows. Because in many cases, these implants are implanted in individuals very young. Some of the technological solutions that we have is we make elastic leads. Right now, all leads actually are made using wires, platinum iridium wires, even if they're stainless steel and they are not elastic. We've actually developed an elastic material that is conductive, that is platinum and biocompatible, and that allows the lead to basically flex and bend and move with the natural movements of the body, the natural movements of the brain, the natural movements of the spine, which is very critical. We also make dense leads, so being able to get a lot more contact sites, so a lot more stimulator components into the lead. If you're going in someone's spine, they have many fibers that are in the spine. And if you could target each one, that would be great. We can't do that today. But having a technology that can be adaptable to the future when that will be possible is very critical. Other things is plug and play. If you want to have a technology that can be adaptable to the future, you want to basically have a technology where maybe I could unplug the lead, change the circuitry, and then plug in a different circuitry and still have the same lead in my body. Many of these technologies, again, you implant in the body, let's say a cochlear implant, at a young child, 9 months old, and that lead has to stay in their body basically for their life. And so, imagine being 60 and having 60-year outdated technology. So we really want to make it so that it's adaptable. Something I just want to touch on a little bit from a more personal perspective, as well as a company perspective, is that I myself, as CEO and founder of MEMStim, believe in this, but I also think it's relevant to other innovators, entrepreneurs, business professionals, is this concept of innovating on demand and not getting caught up so much in the sexiness of innovation, but what is really needed. You know, innovators, they tend to fall in love with whatever it is they're working on, and they will keep innovating like a hamster on a wheel. It's like their brain is racing, but it's not actually making it to have an actual purpose that human beings can use. That's why you have a lot of technologies that start in the university setting and never quite make it into the real world. And then on the other hand, you have entrepreneurs, and they're just always thinking about money. And so there you got, you know, somebody on a hamster wheel, right, with pockets of money, and they're just like, well, how can I make money? How can I make money? And so you may end up with something like fidget spinners, which makes a lot of money, but it's not really serving a real need in society, maybe a distraction need. And so what we really believe is combining those two things and innovating on demand as it's needed so that you can make something profitable, but at the same time, be able to make something that has a purpose and a functionality, especially when you're talking about the medical device area, where you're really talking about life and death solutions that are needed.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you both so much for sharing that. I have a bunch of questions. I do want to make sure if the audience has questions, please bump them into the chat. But, you know, one of the things I wanted to try to, you know, start with is, as you kind of review your past experiences, current projects, we often hear times people feel as though they are not qualified, right? They feel like they're unprepared. But can you remember a time that you took on a task that you felt you were uniquely qualified to handle, and what was that experience like?
I guess I can go. So for myself, this concept of being an innovator really starts with having a vision, and knowing that you're the only person to bring that forward. So when when I started MEMStim, I did not think I was qualified in terms of any great intellectual capacity or all the money in the world or nobody else could do it. I believed I was qualified, and I felt that I was qualified to do it because I knew if I didn't do it, nobody else was going to do it. And some of the ways that make us qualified, I mean, once you get past, everybody here is smart and brilliant. I don't even doubt that. So that's just the base case for everybody on this line, right? But I think the things that really separate people are what you're convicted by, your passions, and what you're really motivated, your purpose is. And in terms of what we're doing, people have been trying to do this for over 30 years, but they've really been focusing on being motivated either by money or being motivated by what was just sexy and cool. And I was kind of a unique individual that I said, forget the money, forget sexy and cool. Let's just get something to help human beings first and foremost, and the money will follow and the sexy and cool will follow.
That's so funny because that's very, very similar to what I was going to say, which is I don't think I was uniquely qualified at all, except for the fact that I was so driven to get it done. So no matter how many times I got hit in the face and tripped up, and I have to keep moving forward, right? There's no way I'm going to fail at this. So it's the same thing. It wasn't because I was smart or had any special powers, but I just wanted it to happen.
That's really interesting. I'd like to dive into that a tiny bit more. I think so much of that drive comes from background, it comes from culture, it comes from family. Where do you think that drive kind of started for both of you? Because everybody's story is different. Can you share a little bat about that?
Yeah, as was mentioned, I come from a large family of kids. So money was always tight, and there were always having to be innovative solutions to get things done. And so for me, I really learned at a young age that you don't take no for an answer. you know, I remember going to college and, you know, of course I was on scholarship, you know, I couldn't afford a pad of pocket. My parents couldn't even afford a textbook. And I had like gotten into probation with my scholarship because I think I got like a B in physics or something. It was like really, you had to keep your GPA really high. Oh no, I got a C in physics. And I remember calling home and, you know, my mom, and she's like, okay, yeah, so what are you going to do about it? And don't take no for an answer and go back and maybe talk to the professor. And so I think growing up with that, you know, like no one's going to come and be your savior. You have to put in the work and you have to be able to use whatever tools you have, relationship, your brains, whatever, it's at your disposal. I think I really got that from a young age in that context.
And I guess what I would say is that if you look at my bio, you'll see that it's a little eclectic and that I have just always, I have been a little short on attention on some things. So I like to go very deep and then move on. I like to go as deep as I can. And so when I got motivated by this because of my personal experience, that was what made me go really deep in that. And that was the motivator. I don't think that it's, so I think this might be rooted in dysfunction, actually, that made it happen.
Okay, I like that. I think a lot of us have a little dysfunction in our roots as well. So Nancy, if you don't mind me asking and staying on with you for a second, you know, do you feel as though you were uniquely qualified as a woman to handle femtech? You know, I think there are a lot of opportunities in women's health, right? There's a lot of untapped territory and people are kind of scared to jump into it. They feel like the market's not there. But what we're hearing from a lot of large companies is that's a big opportunity. There's a lot of investment to be made there. So do you think you being, you know, a woman made that something that was uniquely qualified for you?
Well, I wouldn't have had a lumpectomy if I weren't a woman, probably. There aren't many men who have it, but some, but not all, not many. So yes, that made me uniquely qualified in that regard. But probably also, you know, I had all sons, and I know that when you say breast around women, around boys and men, sometimes it excites parts of their brain that distract them. And so I think it did help that I was able to say breast without like giggling or and having conversations about breast. And I know there are many men who are very, very successful in the field and are not totally comfortable with that. But it may be part of what it was, you know, I found it very easy to have conversations with surgeons and radiologists and about their specific challenges with breast surgery. That may have made it easier by me being a woman. And surprisingly, there are a lot of, or not surprisingly, not surprising at all, there are a lot of the surgeons who do breast surgery are women, I think more than in a general surgery. And, you know, women are easy to talk to.
Awesome. So Dr. Johnson, we have a couple questions from the audience. So did you have the whole product picture in process in mind before you started? Or was this a baby step, bootstrap, let's start with something and then take it from there?
I had probably a good bit of the general concept that I wanted to automate the manufacturing of electrode leads that go in these stimulator implants. But what I did not have was what features those leads were going to have. I didn't even have the right recipe for how to make them. I started as a graduate student in my last year. I did not intend on starting a company. I call myself an accidental entrepreneur. I just got high on my own supply somehow between the pitch competition. I ended up starting a company. I was really just trying to build my resume because everybody that I knew graduated and they said, if you have some entrepreneurial experience, you know, McKinsey and Company will hire you. But I just was like, hey, this is a really good idea. And I got great feedback from potential customers. What changed was that, especially coming out of the university setting, you think you have a prototype, a minimally viable prototype, but in many cases it's been tested in a lab. It hasn't been tested on real human beings and it hasn't been tested with real potential customers in any serious way. So I actually totally redid our intellectual property for the product after after I formed the company, and probably even a few years after, like 3 years after I started the company, we totally restructured all of our intellectual property. Now the product is somewhat still similar, but how we get there is really different now. And the feature set is really different. And so, so it a little both, knowing the basic trajectory of where I wanted to go. But as a company, even now, I have to pivot and think about, well, I don't know, should we be making the full device now? So it's just always something to think about. You always want to stay on your toes as a company and always be ready to innovate, not just the product, but the business model.
I think if you don't mind me following up on that a little bit, what do you think is the biggest challenge in jumping from academia to entrepreneurship to leading a company? I feel like there's definite benefits to understanding all of those worlds, but what are some of the biggest challenges for folks who are looking to do that?
Oh yeah, the biggest challenge from going from academia to entrepreneurship is that in academia, everything is about the, well, I'm using the word product. That's actually an entrepreneurial term. Everything is about the science, the engineering, you can say it's about the product, right? Like what you're making is your life, and making that as best as you can make it, and also making it to be as, crazy, innovative, sci-fi as you can make it. We're talking about people in the medical device space. But when you transition into entrepreneurship, it's no longer about, in a weird way, what you're selling. It's about who's going to buy it, how much money you're going to charge them, how much are they willing to pay, what's the business model going to look like. And I had to learn that by having just a lot of mentors, a lot of people I would just share my idea with and pitch to, that really beat it into me that you keep talking about the product, but what's the business? So now I steer it. Like for an audience like this, I'll spend a lot of time talking about the product. But if I was actually talking to a potential customer, I'd have a whole nother slide deck, which is all about the business. And if I was talking to an investor, it's all about the business model. They just want like one slide on the product and then tell me how you're going to get money out of this. What are your financials going to look like? So that was the biggest thing. And then in terms of being an entrepreneur and actually having employees and having people, the biggest transition there is that I mean, I don't have any kids, but I feel like this is the closest thing I had to kids as employees. So it's kind of like, using that analogy, you were single and carefree and maybe you paid yourself, maybe you didn't pay yourself as an entrepreneur. There's always some side hustles you could do to make money. But when you get employees, although they say you shouldn't feel this way, I believe, especially particularly as women, we might feel this way. And I know I do. And I mean, a lot of female entrepreneurs that do. There's a sense of responsibility that I now have other families whose livelihoods depend on me. So if I see them buy a house, it's almost as if I bought a house. It like makes you have to work harder. And so that's kind of the challenge in transitioning from just being an entrepreneur to having a company and employees and building a culture and realizing that whatever you do, they do. So if you're irritated when you come in the morning and you talk to people however you want to, then don't be surprised that 2 weeks later, they're talking to somebody that's under them however they want to. So it's, I hate to say it, but almost a lot like kids. They do what you do and not what you say.
I think one of the best, and I've shared this before, one of the best stories I've heard, because I love what you just said, was from a entrepreneur. He was, forget his name off the top of my head, but he's the CEO of Next Stage Medical, right? Huge company that got acquired by Fresenius. And I heard him speak at a conference once, and he said for the longest time, he was just part of the team, right? He was leading them, but he didn't realize what that meant until one day he came in and he was just quiet, went to his office, closed his door, and didn't come out for 3 hours. And, 3 hours later, his secretary comes in and says, "Is it true?" He said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "It's all over. We're losing our jobs. We've run out of money. Like, this is what everyone's talking about." He said, "My dog died this morning." He goes, "This has got nothing to do with the company." He goes, "I just didn't want to talk to everybody." And he said, that's the moment he realized he was responsible for so many other people. And that story has stuck with me for years, because everything you said just completely echoes that, right? It's, you are responsible for those people. And if people say you shouldn't be, whatever, I think you should be. That makes you an excellent founder. It makes you an excellent person to talk to. It makes an excellent leader. You should feel responsible for those people. It's an extra layer of stress, but kudos for looking at it that way. So this is actually a great time to switch to a question for Nancy, because people are fascinated by this idea of a virtual company, because you don't have to deal with, other people directly, but you are now navigating all of these different areas where you don't necessarily have expertise and are relying on partners. talk about what that was like as a one-woman show. You know, how did you get yourself comfortable with outsourcing so much, perhaps that you had done before on your own or hadn't done, because you come from a background in consulting, correct? So you've
Right.
had a lot of experience with this.
Right, right. I really regarded my set of contractors as a team, and there was no difference for me in them being an employee versus them being a contractor. I knew that I was sharing them with other people who were also using them. And so that meant that I had no say over when they did what they were going to do, or get them on my schedule, or say that this was going to be a late night, or so the only way that I could lead them all was first to make them feel like, wait a minute, you are part of the Health Beacons family, right? And to use your, Angelique, your metaphor. And then to just make sure that you were, I call it servant leadership, right? I am here to do anything I can to help you do what I want you to do, right? So what can I do? How can I make it easier? Like, so, okay, you have all these other responsibilities. Is there anything that I can do that makes it easier for you to help me? And I also made it so that it was I tried to make it so that it was a team, like people knew who each other were. We all had calls together. I think that people felt like they were as much an employee there. It's not the same as being an employee, but I think that they really felt like they're part of the team. Even now, when they're all still sort of moving on, they're still calling back and, you know, finding out what's going on and sort of mourning the fact that we're not a team together still.
So that brings up I'm curious. So I come from a product development background, and do you think it's easier to outsource everything and manage it that way? Or do you think it's easier to outsource pieces of it? Because I've known groups that have done both and groups that have had great successes with both, and then challenges. Do you think it's easier to put together an entire virtual team and make that work? Or is it easier to own some things and outsource others?
I wish I had had the funding to own some things and outsource others. And I know that because when we were coming up to the sale point, I knew I needed to have some people take over parts of it, because I knew I wasn't going to have the bandwidth when we were going through the due diligence process. So comparatively, I think it would have been so much easier if I had a core team. I had a lot of difficulty raising money, and that was a constant challenge. So I was always scrapping and saving, and so what's easier about a contract is that you can define how much that's going to cost you. That's less than it would if you were giving them benefits and having them as a full employee.
Yeah, would you mind sharing a little bit about the fundraising journey? And Dr. Johnson, I'm going to ask you the same thing in a minute. So those are both definitely questions that are coming in from the audience. What was that experience like? Obviously not very fun.
It was horrible. I hated that. So I had no success in the Boston area. I had a very well-respected woman in the angel community who told me directly to my face, after making me wait for 3 hours, setting up an appointment with me, making me wait 3 hours, sitting down, saying, how did you think you could ever do this? You're not a doctor, and I work with doctors, and they can't do this. How could you do this? And sort of snittily then saying, like, there's no money for you in Boston. Maybe California would have money. So like really surprisingly negative reactions, even in women's angel groups and all of that, really. And, you know, maybe I was not presenting the case well, and who knows what that was all about. But so I had a group of angels. I ended up sort of getting half of my additional funding from them, and half I found a worldwide distributor, and they gave me prepayments for product. So After the first year of selling product, they started taking discounts, larger discounts, and when I could afford it. So they weren't I wasn't then left high and dry. So it was a really nice arrangement because they gave me a chunk of money up front that I could use to finish development of the product. And then I could just take that off profits at the end.
That's interesting. Do you think that kind of distribution partnership is rare, or is that something that you think exists around the world? People just need to know how to look for it.
I think you need to look for it, but okay. I think it's not rare.
Okay.
I think it's done, and I think it's actually a fabulous mechanism, but I do think you need good lawyers to set it up. Have good legal help when you're setting it up, because they can take everything if you're not careful.
Yeah, it's not something I have much experience with, so that's really excellent advice. Okay, let's go, Angelique. What do you think?
So yeah, it's always interesting. One thing I want to piggyback off of what was said was that it's interesting, people that have never perhaps started a business, run a business, been in the muck and the mire, tend to be the people that always, are like the party pooper, like, oh, you're never going to be able to do it. And I feel like there's this false sense of bravado with investors. And it goes up and down I think there are the investors that really know it in some ways, and they tend to be the more quiet ones that just are like, I either like it or I don't like it. But then you have many more investors that are themselves, I think, insecure. And so the easiest thing, I judge for pitch competitions nationally, and I see all the time, the easiest thing to do, and everybody knows it, it's easier to tear apart an idea than to have something actually practical and useful to say about it. So that's something. So for me, when I started out, I was doing pitch competitions. I was winning them. It was really great because I got to pitch in front of venture capitalists. Then I would have meetings with angel investors and venture capitalists. And what really became evident to me was that, one, in me being a component supplier, I was not going to get venture capital money, at least at that time. Now I think it's different, but about that time when I started, it just was not going to happen. But then also I realized that having come out of the university setting, not quite knowing what this was going to look like, I said, well, if I could get money in some alternate universe to build out all the research and development, and really when I'm at the stage where I want to expand. So now everything is fixed and we want to expand, and now we're just going to go from a pilot plant to a larger plant, and we need money for distribution and all this other stuff. That's when I wanted to bring the investors in. So I've done funding through SBIRs, through the NIH, and then gotten state contracts that come as almost like a match to that funding. And that's why I'm based in Kentucky, because they have that program. So, and then on top of that, then leveraging that to do creative loans, I call them. So I've done loans, but I only ever do a loan if I have a contract to basically pay it back. And so I almost treat my loans as like a line of credit instead of a loan. And so that way, when my contract is done, the loan is done, or I have something residual and I just close out the loan. Again, growing up and not having a lot of finances in my family, I just became I'm very averse to debt. And when you're in debt, you can almost feel like a slave. And a lot of times with companies, especially starting out, everybody's like, yeah, if you can just get a loan, everybody's like pushing the loans, but people don't realize that when you're not having the revenue to back up that loan, you really are doing a second mortgage on your house and stuff. So I did the SBIR track. I've done about $5 million now between all of those different sources and non-dilutive funding. Still own 100% of my company, which, at one point I'll take on investment at some point. I'm always, though, wooing investors in terms of always meeting with investors and always, catching up with investors, and, and people always reach out and say, hey, are you looking, or can I invest? And I said, well, I'm not doing a round now, but I'd love to pitch to you. And I just kind of keep this digital Rolodex of people that when the time comes, the relationships are already forged with either the investor or somebody can lead me to an investor.
That's so spot on. I mean, it's one of those things that we hear often from entrepreneurs is you can't wait until you need money to get those relationships. It's also the same thing with job hunting. And, we hear that often, and you can't look for a job when you need a job. If those relationships and the network is not there, then it's going to be really hard. You're going to be facing an uphill battle. But kudos on the $5 million in non-diluted funding. That is outstanding. I don't know that I've heard a lot of people throw that kind of number around before. So that's incredible. So well done.
Thank you. And one thing I also add to that is the concept of, like we were just talking about, like getting these these advancements of either, a sales contract. That ideally, I'm working my way in that way now as a CEO, is that maybe not just jumping to an angel investor or an investment firm, but doing strategic investments. So doing a venture arm of somebody that actually want to exit to, or that want a sales contract. And then the other thing is, everybody was like, oh, just take investment dollars and build out this. And I was like, well, actually there's something called writing a sales contract. And then the person that you're actually developing, because we are an OEM basically. So here's a sales contract. I'm going to use your money, give you what you want at the same time. So it have to be tricky, as was mentioned, with the intellectual property, and have good lawyers, but making sure that what you have is what you have, what I have is what I have. And it's basically a way to bootstrap, a med tech company that I don't think is talked about as much.
I feel like there could be a whole session that I may call you two back for just on this concept. But I mean, this leads into another really great question from the audience, and this is for both of you. Any advice for someone who's looking to start a med device company? What is there one piece of advice or one thing? And I know we talked about this previously, that you are glad that you know now, or wish that someone had told you. Any advice for anyone starting a med device firm?
Yikes. Where to start? Well, I think both Dr. Johnson and I have said that really know what you want to accomplish. You don't need to know specifically, because it could evolve, but pretty have a vision there of where you're going. Because one thing is absolutely for sure is that you are going to get smashed down and hit around and dragged through the mud. So it has to be something that you just feel absolutely dedicated to getting done. And then strangely, when you have that vision, things just keep weirdly happening. I found, I didn't know anything about establishing contract manufacturing. And I ended up with 5 contract manufacturers who did different parts of my system, and relationships with all of them, that then now I know a lot about contract manufacturing, but you can't bone up on that ahead of time, right? You just fight your way through and I think listening, talking and listening is just the biggest help that you have, is just use your ears in doing that.
I think that's excellent advice, because my mom always had a saying, I may have been born last night, but that doesn't mean I didn't stay up all night studying. That's literally, as an entrepreneur, especially starting something out, you kind of have to go in over-promising, but also not over-promising so much that you end up in the bind, but also you're always selling a little ahead of where you are. And so you have to learn quick. And it's not just on the product side, it's on the people management side, it's on the fundraising side, everything, it's on the contractor side. One thing I would add to that piece of advice is that when you're starting out, using contract manufacturers, having an idea. What I learned now is, when people start med device companies, a lot of times it's not started by a medical doctor or PhD. It's usually someone, that has a background in consulting, right? Raise a hand, right? And what they got really right is the market and the business model. And they were just like, okay, business model's clean, it works. Just get some existing technology. Let's put this together and let's move forward. So think about, I think my purpose is I had to do something innovative, because that's where I came from. But if the world was my oyster and I could go back in time, and I didn't I didn't have this obligation from where I came from to do what I'm doing, and I love what I'm doing, I would literally just look and say, what is not a highly classified FDA device in terms of regulation? If it's a surgical tool, for Pete's sake, go after that. Think about, is the market already exists for this, or is this a market that I could create relatively easy? Like, are there distribution channels for it? Don't go for the sexiest sounding, coolest thing that you can do. And I see a lot of people do that in the med device space. They go for what sounds really, well, they go for the cure for cancer when there were so many other things. Better radiology was along the way to the cure for cancer, but they're still fixated on the cure for cancer, that they're forgetting that there's all this other lower hanging fruit, sort of say, where they could make really great impact. So I would just say, just think about how quickly you could get the company going and how it's regulated, and whether you can make a lot of money doing something that doesn't take as much time and money, basically.
That's really great advice. Being able to identify, in medical device, I think it's relative compared to other markets. I think it's relatively hard to make change. That doctors get very wed to their tools, their ways of doing things, and so unless it somehow fits into, that is an obvious next step for what I can improve, and I see it, and I can make it. Then if you're trying to do something that's too far ahead of them, making markets is a really, really big, expensive task. And so just like finding that next step, that little improvement that makes their lives easier, makes the patient's outcomes better. I agree totally. That's the thing to focus on.
Well, we are right up on time. This has been an outstanding session. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Angelique. You both are outstanding and incredible and inspiring. And this has just been a wonderful, wonderful session. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Everyone on the line, we're gonna shut down. It's been wonderful seeing you all as well, and I look forward to seeing you all again very soon. We'll be doing more Women in MedTech in 2021, so keep your eyes open. We'll be sending out more programming information, but have a wonderful rest of your evening, and thank you all again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Well, I, for one, I'm glad I dialed into that webinar.